The Krell Dominion had never known defeat. For over 3,000 cycles, their war fleets had swept across the galaxy like a storm of fire and iron, bending star systems to their will, silencing rebellions before they could even form, and rewriting history in their own image. Their cities gleamed with impossible spires, their armies marched in perfect unison, and their leaders spoke with voices that echoed through time itself. So when the humans of Earth finally stopped fighting, the Krell did not just celebrate, they declared a new era. On the capital world of Vorthus Prime, the Grand Convergence Hall buzzed with triumphant energy. Thousands of alien dignitaries from every corner of the Dominion filled the vast chamber, their many eyes fixed on the raised dais where Lord Vexar, High Sovereign of the Krell, stood tall in robes woven from captured starlight. His silver skin shimmered under the twin suns filtering through the crystalline dome above, and his voice, deep and resonant, rolled like thunder across the hall. "Today," he announced, "the last spark of defiance in the Orion Arm is extinguished. The species known as humanity, once loud, once proud, has bowed. Their fleets are dust. Their colonies are silent. Their leaders come before us not as warriors, but as petitioners." Below the dais, a small group of humans stood in simple gray uniforms, unadorned and unarmed. They looked small against the towering Krell and the swirling crowds of diplomats, warriors, and scholars. Most kept their eyes lowered, shoulders tense as if bracing for shame. But one man stood differently. He was lean, with short brown hair and calm eyes that took in everything without flinching. His name was Ethan Cole, and though he held no rank higher than junior diplomat, he had been chosen to speak for Earth. The Krell found this amusing. They had expected a general, a president, someone with medals or scars. Instead, they got a quiet man who carried no weapon and wore no symbol of office. To them, it was proof of humanity's weakness. A species that sent a clerk to negotiate its own extinction was not worth remembering. Lord Vexar disdained toward Ethan with a long, clawed hand. "Step forward, human," he commanded. "Sign the Treaty of Final Submission. Let your name be the last your kind ever writes in freedom." Ethan walked slowly up the steps, his boots clicking softly against the polished obsidian floor. The entire hall fell silent. Even the whispering winds that usually flowed through the chamber seemed to pause. He reached the treaty, a scroll of living metal that pulsed faintly, ready to bind itself to the signer's genetic code. A Krell scribe handed him a stylus made of bone. For a long moment, Ethan did not move. He simply looked at the scroll, then at Lord Vexar, then out at the sea of alien faces watching him with curiosity, pity, or contempt. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear, carrying further than anyone expected. "You forgot rule number 1. The words hung in the air like a dropped stone. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Some Krell blinked their triple eyelids. Others leaned toward their neighbors, murmuring in guttural tones. "Rule 1, what rule?" There was no such clause in any human treaty, no mention of it in their intercepted communications, no reference in their databases. The Krell had studied humanity for years before striking. They knew their history, their politics, their art, even their children's nursery rhymes. But this meant nothing to them. Lord Vexar's eyes narrowed. His crest, a fan of iridescent scales along his neck, flared slightly in irritation. "Speak plainly, human," he growled, "or sign the treaty and be done with your species' noise." Ethan did not reach for the stylus. He kept his hands at his sides and met the Sovereign's gaze without fear. "You think you've won," he said. "You think we're broken because our ships are gone and our soldiers are quiet. But you made one mistake, and what is that?" Vexar asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "You assumed we were like everyone else?" A low murmur spread through the hall. Some aliens shifted uneasily. Others scoffed. But a few, those who had dealt with humans before, felt a cold prickle at the base of their spines. There had always been something odd about humanity. They did not surrender easily. Even when outgunned, they fought with a strange, stubborn hope. And when they did stop fighting, it was never because they were beaten. It was because they were waiting. Ethan turned slightly, addressing not just Vexar, but the entire assembly. "Every child on Earth learns 3 rules before they learn to read. Rule number 1 is the most important. It's not written in law books. It's not posted on walls. It's passed down in whispers and stories, in the way we look at each other when things get dark." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You never show your full hand until the enemy thinks the game is over." This time the silence was deeper. Even the ambient hum of the hall's energy field seemed to fade. Lord Vexar stared at Ethan, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a sharp barking sound that echoed off the walls. "Is that all a riddle?" a nursery sang. "You stand on the edge of oblivion and offer us a bedtime story?" Ethan didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded once. "That's all." The Sovereign's amusement faded. He signaled to his guards. "Take him. Place him under watch. Let him watch from his cell as his world is erased from the star charts." 2 armored Krell warriors stepped forward, their massive frames casting long shadows over Ethan. But as they reached for him, he raised a hand. "I'll go quietly," he said. "No need for force." They led him away through a side passage, the crowd parting like water. As he disappeared into the corridor, the celebration slowly resumed. Music swelled, drinks were poured, and the treaty was declared signed by proxy. The Krell believed they had witnessed the end of humanity, but far away, in the cold dark beyond Pluto, something stirred. Deep beneath the ice of Earth's Arctic Circle, inside a bunker so well hidden that not even the Krell's best scanners had found it, a single red light blinked on a console that had been dark for months. A soft chime sounded, then a voice, calm and female, spoke into the silence. Rule 1 activated. On Mars, in a sealed habitat buried under red dust, a technician looked up from her screen. The message flashing there was simple. "Stand by." She tapped her earpiece. "All teams prepare for phase echo." In the asteroid belt, a mining station powered up its dormant engines. On Titan, a cargo ship named the Wayfarer uncloaked from its hiding place inside a methane cloud. And across dozens of human colonies, some thought lost, others believed abandoned, people stopped what they were doing, looked at each other, and nodded. The Krell had taken the bait. They had seen the broken fleets, the silent cities, the weary diplomats. They had assumed humanity had nothing left. They were wrong. Ethan knew this as he sat alone in his cell, staring at the smooth black wall. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even worried. Because rule number 1 wasn't just a saying. It was a promise that humanity never truly lost as long as one person remembered how to fight smart. And somewhere out there, in the endless dark between stars, the real fight was just beginning. Ethan Cole sat alone in his cell, a smooth-walled chamber carved from black stone deep inside the Krell Sovereign's palace. There were no windows, no doors visible to the eye, just a faint hum in the air and a single light that never dimmed. The Krell believed silence and isolation would break him. They did not know that silence was where humans planned best. Outside, the celebration on Vorthus Prime raged on. Music pulsed through the city's spires. Alien voices sang victory hymns and streams of data flowed through the Dominion's networks, declaring the human problem solved. But beneath the noise, something else moved. Quiet, precise, and unstoppable. Back on Earth, under 2 miles of Arctic ice, Commander Lena Ruiz stood in the heart of Project Sentinel. The room was cold, lit only by the soft blue glow of dormant control panels. She was not a soldier by training. Once she had managed supply chains for lunar farms, but war had reshaped everyone. Now she was the last link in a chain that stretched across the solar system. The message had come through just hours after Ethan spoke his words. 2 words only, Rule 1. That was all it took. Every human who had been trained, every system that had been hidden, every plan that had been waiting in the dark, it all woke up at once. Lena tapped a command into the console. Around her, massive servers hummed to life. Above, in high orbit, long dormant platforms, disguised as space junk or dead satellites, unfolded like sleeping birds. Their solar wings stretched wide, their targeting arrays locked on, and their weapons cores warmed from decades of slumber. These were not warships. They were guardians, silent, patient, and built for one purpose: to strike only when the enemy believed Earth was defenseless. Meanwhile, on Mars, a group of engineers in a buried greenhouse stopped tending to tomato vines and opened a hidden panel in the floor. Inside lay a cache of encrypted drives, quantum comms units, and pulse rifles wrapped in oilcloth. They worked quickly without speaking. They had rehearsed this moment in their dreams for years. On the moon, in a crater named Tycho, a retired schoolteacher named Carl Briggs climbed into a maintenance rover. He drove not toward the colony but away, deep into the shadowed rim where no one ever went. There behind a false rock face waited a shuttle painted matte black. Its engines were cold, but its fuel cells were full. Carl had not flown in 30 years, but he remembered the codes. He keyed them in. The shuttle's lights flickered on. Farther out near the rings of Saturn, the cargo hauler Wayfarer drifted silently. Its captain, Jake Morrow, leaned over a star chart spread across his console. He wasn't hauling grain or minerals anymore. Hidden in the ship's cargo bay were 6 warheads, each no bigger than a suitcase but each capable of collapsing a dreadnought's shields in under 3 seconds. They had been built in secret on Ceres, smuggled out in food crates and stored inside hollowed-out water tanks. Now they were ready. Back on Vorthus Prime, the Krell finally grew uneasy. Their historians scoured every human database they had seized. They read through school textbooks, military logs, even old fiction novels. Nowhere did they find rule number 1. It was not a law. It was not a treaty clause. It was not even listed in human military doctrine, and that frightened them more than any weapon. Lord Vexar summoned his intelligence chief, a sharp-eyed Krell named Zorath. "Find out what it means," he ordered. "Tear apart every human mind we have in custody if you must." Zorath bowed low. "We have questioned the others. They claim not to know. Only the diplomat, Cole, seems aware." "Then question him again," Vexar snapped. "Use pain if needed." But when the guards entered Ethan's cell, they found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly. He looked more like a monk than a prisoner. When they demanded answers, he simply said, "You'll understand soon enough." Frustrated, Zorath ordered Ethan moved to a higher security wing. As he was led through winding corridors, Ethan noticed something. The Krell guards were tense. Their steps were quicker. Their eyes darted toward the ceiling. Something was wrong in the palace. Something they weren't saying. At the same time, across human space, civilian ships began to vanish, not in panic, but in pattern. Freighters that once ran regular routes between colonies now disappeared into asteroid fields or jumped to uncharted coordinates. To the Krell, it looked like refugees fleeing. But to those in the know, it was a gathering. Every ship carried people, parts, or plans. They were not running away. They were coming together. On Europa, a team of scientists sealed their lab and activated a beacon buried in the ice. On Ganymede, a power station rerouted its output to a hidden array beneath the surface. Even on Earth, in cities the Krell thought were empty, small groups met in basements and subway tunnels. They shared coordinates, checked weapons, and whispered old sayings to each other for courage. The Krell had assumed humanity's surrender was total because they saw no armies, no fleets, no broadcasts of defiance. What they did not understand was that humans had learned long ago that the loudest wars are often lost first. The real fight happens in silence. Ethan knew this. He also knew that Krell would not stay confused forever. Soon they would notice the missing ships, the strange energy spikes near human colonies, the sudden silence from their own outposts on the edge of Sol space, and when they did, panic would follow. But by then it would be too late. In his new cell, Ethan lay on the thin mat provided and stared at the ceiling. He thought of his sister, who had died in the first orbital strike over Chicago. He thought of the kids in Nairobi who had hidden radios in their shoes to keep news flowing. He thought of the old man in Buenos Aires who had taught him rule number 1 when he was 6 years old, during a blackout caused by a solar flare. "Never let them see you sweat," the man had said. "And never ever show your best move first." Ethan smiled faintly. The Krell had seen sweat. They had seen broken ships and silent cities. They had seen everything humanity wanted them to see. What they had not seen was the hand still hidden behind the back, and that hand was about to move. The Krell Dominion still believed they were in control. Their banners flew over human cities, their patrols marched through silent streets, and their broadcasts declared peace across the occupied worlds. But beneath that calm surface, humanity was moving like water through cracks in stone, quiet, steady, and impossible to stop. Lena Ruiz stood in the command center under the Arctic ice, watching as green lights blinked on across her main screen. Each light represented a human cell waking up, on Luna, on Mars, in the Belt, even on distant outposts near Neptune. They were not soldiers in uniform. They were farmers, teachers, mechanics, and medics, but they all knew their roles. They had trained in secret for years, waiting for the signal. And now, with Rule 1 activated, they were no longer hiding. In a dusty warehouse on the edge of New Shanghai, a woman named Mira Chen checked the seals on a crate marked agricultural supplies. Inside were not seeds, but signal jammers built from old drone parts. She loaded them onto a solar cart and drove through checkpoints manned by bored Krell guards who barely glanced at her. To them, she was just another human going about her dull life. They did not see the coded message blinking on her wristband or the small detonator hidden in her boot. On Mars, a group of teenagers who once played zero-gravity soccer now worked in shifts inside an old terraforming plant. They rerouted coolant lines to mask the heat signature of a hidden comms array. Their leader, a boy named Eli, had lost both parents in the orbital bombardment. He did not speak much, but his hands moved fast and sure. Every wire he connected, every frequency he tuned, was a promise to those who could not fight anymore. Far above, in the silent dark near Jupiter, the Wayfarer drifted between two of the gas giant's icy moons. Jake Morrow sat in the cockpit, sipping cold coffee from a dented mug. His co-pilot, a quiet woman named Dana Briggs, monitored the long-range scanners. They had just received a burst transmission from Titan. The Krell shipyard at Viridian Ring was running full shifts, building new cruisers to replace losses they did not yet know they had suffered. Jake tapped a command into his console. A course plotted itself, a narrow path through gravitational eddies that only human pilots dared fly. They would strike in 3 days. Back on Vorthus Prime, Ethan Cole was allowed 1 hour of exercise each day in a small courtyard open to the sky. The Krell thought it was a kindness. In truth, it was their mistake. From that courtyard, Ethan could see the palace's main comm spire, a slender needle of crystal that linked the Sovereign to every corner of the Dominion. He watched the guards change shifts. He noted the blind spots in their patrol routes, and he memorized the timing of the energy pulses that kept the palace shields active. He also received a visitor, not a guard, not an interrogator, but a young Krell aide named Tail, who brought him water each morning. Tail was curious. Unlike most of his kind, he had studied human art, listened to their music, even read their poetry. One day, as he handed Ethan the cup, he whispered, "What is Rule 1? Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "It's the reason your empire will not last forever." Tail did not reply, but the next day he left a small data chip hidden under the cup. Ethan palmed it without being seen. That night in his cell he played it back. It was a map of the palace's lower levels, service tunnels, power conduits, emergency exits. Someone inside the Krell system was helping, or perhaps someone was beginning to doubt. Meanwhile, the first real blow fell not with fire, but with silence. 3 Krell dreadnoughts, Iron Maw, Sovereign's Fist, and Void Reaper were patrolling the outer edge of the Sol system when their signals cut out. No distress calls, no explosions detected, just empty space where mighty warships had been. At first, the Dominion command assumed a comms glitch, but when a scout vessel sent to investigate also vanished, alarm spread through the ranks. Lord Vexar demanded answers. Zorath reported that all human colonies remained quiet, their populations docile, their infrastructure under Krell control. "They have no fleet," he insisted. "No weapons capable of such an attack." But he was wrong. Hidden in the Oort cloud, wrapped in thermal blankets and powered by cold fusion cells, a dozen human strike craft waited. They were not built for speed or glory. They were built for stealth, hull shapes designed to scatter radar, engines that left no exhaust trail, and weapons that fired pulses of gravitic shear, invisible until they tore a ship apart from the inside. These were the children of Rule 1, unseen until the moment they struck. On Earth, people began to notice small changes. Streetlights flickered at odd hours. Old public screens, long dark, flashed with static for a few seconds each midnight. In some cities, Krell patrols found their hoverbikes disabled by sugar in the fuel lines. In others, supply crates arrived with half their contents missing, replaced by notes that read, "We remember." The Krell tightened security. They doubled patrols, scanned every human for hidden tech, and banned gatherings of more than 3. But they could not ban thoughts. They could not stop a mother from whispering a code phrase to her child. They could not see the network of trust that bound humans together, even in chains. Ethan knew the next phase was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the way the guards' steps grew heavier, in the tension humming through the palace walls. The Krell were scared now. not of armies but of the unknown, and fear made them careless. One evening during his courtyard walk, Ethan saw a streak of light in the sky. It was too fast for a meteor, too bright for a satellite. He smiled. That was the Wayfarer, making its final approach to the Viridian Ring. The raid would begin soon. He returned to his cell and lay down on the thin mat. He closed his eyes and listened to the hum of the palace. Somewhere out there, Jake Morrow was arming his warheads. Lena Ruiz was coordinating the final countdown. Mira Chen was planting her last jammer. And millions of humans scattered across 100 worlds were holding their breath. The Krell thought they had won because the guns had fallen silent. But silence was not surrender. It was the space between heartbeats. And in that space, humanity was getting ready to strike back, not with rage but with purpose. Rule 1 was not just about hiding your strength. It was about knowing when to use it. And that time was almost here. The Viridian Ring shipyard hung in space like a silver spiderweb spun around a dead moon. Krell engineers moved along its arms, welding new hull plates onto half-built cruisers, unaware that death was already among them. The Wayfarer had slipped past 3 patrol grids using old asteroid trajectories and a trick with solar flares that only human pilots understood. Now it drifted just beyond sensor range, dark and silent. Inside the cockpit, Jake Morrow took a slow breath. Beside him, Dana Briggs gave a single nod. No words were needed. They both knew what came next. Jake tapped a sequence into the console. 6 warheads detached from the cargo bay, their thrusters firing in short, silent bursts. They moved like ghosts toward the shipyard's core, the gravity control hub that kept the entire structure stable. Minutes later, the first explosion lit up the void. Not fire, but a pulse of warped space that crumpled the hub like paper. The shipyard groaned, its arms twisting as artificial gravity failed. Alarms blared across Krell channels, but it was too late. The second warhead struck the main reactor. The third hit the command spire. By the time the fourth detonated, the Wayfarer was already gone, vanishing into the shadow of a passing comet. On Vorthus Prime, Lord Vexar watched the feed from Viridian Ring collapse into static. His claws dug into the armrests of his throne. Impossible, he hissed. They have no ships, no weapons, nothing. But reports kept coming. A Krell supply convoy near Alpha Centauri vanished. A listening post on the edge of human space went dark. Then the unthinkable, a distress call from a dreadnought orbiting Earth itself. Before the transmission cut off, the captain's final words were clear. They are inside the hull. The truth hit the Krell like a hammer. Humanity had never stopped fighting. They had just changed how they fought. Back on Earth, the uprising began not with guns but with light. In every city under Krell control, street lamps flickered in a pattern, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. It was an old Morse code signal, taught in schools before the war. People looked up. They understood. In basements, hidden panels opened. In sewers, teams armed themselves with pulse rifles and scramblers. In the skies above, orbital platforms that the Krell had dismissed as debris powered up and locked onto Krell patrol ships. Lena Ruiz watched it all from her Arctic command center. Her screen showed green light spreading like wildfire across the planet. All cells report ready, she said into the comm. Execute phase echo. In New Shanghai, Mira Chen triggered the jammers she had planted weeks ago. Krell comms went silent. Their hoverbikes stalled. In the confusion, human teams swarmed checkpoints not to kill but to disable. They used EMP charges wrapped in cloth, sonic emitters hidden in backpacks, and old-fashioned crowbars when needed. The Krell, trained for open battle, were lost in the chaos of a war fought in alleys and tunnels. On Mars, Eli and his team activated the comms array they had built inside the terraformer. A single message blasted across every human frequency. Rule 1 is live. Stand tall. Within hours, rebel signals echoed from Phobos to the Valles Marineris. Krell garrisons found themselves surrounded, not by armies but by civilians with tools, courage, and perfect timing. The Krell tried to respond with force. They sent dropships to crush the uprisings, but the dropships never landed. High above, the Sentinel platforms fired precise beams that melted their thrusters mid-descent. The ships tumbled harmlessly into empty fields or frozen lakes. No humans were hurt. The Krell were humiliated. Ethan Cole felt the shift even in his cell. The guards no longer walked with pride. Their steps were quick, their voices low. One morning, Tyle brought his water with trembling hands. "They are losing," he whispered. "Everywhere," Ethan nodded. "It was never about winning a battle. It was about proving we could not be erased." That night, the palace shook, not from an explosion, but from a power surge deep in the lower levels. Ethan knew what it meant. The human teams hidden in Krell supply ships, posing as laborers or prisoners, had reached the core systems. They were cutting the Dominion's nerve from the inside. Lord Vexar, desperate, ordered Ethan brought before him one last time. The Grand Convergence Hall was empty now, the celebration long gone. Only the Sovereign and 2 guards remained. Vexar's crest was dull, his eyes bloodshot. "You did this," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. Ethan stood calmly. "We did nothing you did not allow. You saw broken ships and silent cities and called it victory. But humans do not measure strength by what you see. We measure it by what we choose to hide." Vexar stepped down from his dais, his claws flexing. "What do you want? Territory? Resources? A seat in my court?" Ethan shook his head. "We want to be left alone." And remembered. The words struck deeper than any blade. The Krell had built their empire on fear and conquest. They had erased cultures, rewritten histories, and crushed every species that dared resist. But humanity had done something no one else had. They had made the Krell doubt themselves. Outside the palace, the sky glowed. Not with fire, but with human ships emerging from hidden orbits. Not a fleet of war machines, but a wall of light. Thousands of civilian vessels, mining rigs and freighters, all flying in perfect formation. Their running lights spelling out a single phrase in every known language. Rule 1. The Krell guards lowered their weapons. Even they understood now. Ethan turned to leave. No one stopped him. As he walked through the silent halls, he passed Tell, who stood with his head bowed. "Will you destroy us?" the young aide asked. "No," Ethan said. "We just want you to remember what happens when you think a people are beaten." And with that, the real war ended. Not with a bang, but with a lesson. The Peace Summit was held aboard the orbital station Helios, a neutral meeting place floating between Proxima Centauri and Sol. Its halls were quiet, lit by soft white panels and lined with gardens grown from earth seeds. It was here, far from the ruins of war and the pride of empires, that the fate of 2 civilizations would be decided. Ethan Cole walked into the main chamber alone. He wore the same gray uniform he had worn on Vorthus Prime, though it was now clean and pressed. His steps were calm, his eyes steady. Across the room, seated at a long table of polished moonwood, waited Lord Vexar. The Krell sovereign looked older, his silver skin dull, his crest folded low. The arrogance that once filled his voice was gone, replaced by something quieter. Respect, perhaps, or fear. Around them sat representatives from a dozen species, some allies of the Krell, others former enemies, all watching in silence. They had come not to witness a treaty of surrender, but to see what humanity would demand after turning the galaxy upside down. Vexar stood as Ethan approached. "You could have taken everything," he said, his voice low. "You had our fleets broken, our colonies in chaos, our people afraid. Why show mercy?" Ethan took the seat opposite him. "Because mercy is not weakness." Hit his choice. The room held its breath. Vexar placed a data slate on the table. "Name your terms, territory, reparations, a seat on the high conclave. Anything within reason." Ethan did not touch the slate. He looked not at Vexar, but at the window behind him where the stars shone cold and clear. "We don't want your empire," he said. "We never did. We just want to live our lives without fear, and we want you to remember us not as slaves, not as enemies, but as equals." A murmur ran through the chamber. No conquered species had ever refused power when it was offered. But humanity was not like the others. "We propose 3 things," Ethan continued. "First, a mutual non-aggression pact. Neither side will attack the other for 100 cycles. Second, open trade, food, medicine, knowledge. But no weapons, no spies, no hidden clauses. Third, cultural exchange. Your scholars may visit our schools. Our artists may display their work in your cities. We learn from each other not through force, but through trust." Vexar stared at him. "That is all?" "That is enough." For a long moment, the sovereign said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. He tapped the data slate. The terms appeared in glowing script. He signed first, his claw tracing the ancient Krell symbol for honor. Then he pushed the slate toward Ethan. Ethan signed with his own name, simple and plain. No titles, no grand words, Just Ethan Cole. As the treaty sealed itself with a soft chime, the tension in the room broke like a wave. Delegates began to speak, some in awe, others in disbelief. But no one argued. The galaxy had just changed, not with fire, but with words. Later, as the suns of Proxima cast long shadows through the station's corridors, a young Krell aide approached Ethan. It was Tail. He held a small box made of carved wood. "My people do not give gifts lightly," he said, "but this is from those among us who listened." "Who learned?" Ethan opened the box. Inside lay a smooth stone, dark and cool to the touch, with a single word etched into its surface in human script. "Remember." He closed the box and nodded. "Thank you." Back on Earth, people gathered in cities, towns, and farms. They did not cheer. They did not fire weapons into the sky. They simply stood together, looking up at the stars. In New Shanghai, Mira Chen turned off the last jammer and walked home. On Mars, Eli planted a real tree in the red soil, its roots wrapped in earth dirt. In the Arctic bunker, Lena Ruiz powered down Project Sentinel for the last time. The lights went dark, but she smiled as she left. The Wayfarer returned to dock at Luna Station. Jake Morrow stepped onto the platform and hugged his sister, who had thought him dead. Dana Briggs stood nearby, watching the Earth rise over the moon's edge. No words were needed. The Krell began to withdraw. Their ships left human space one by one, not in shame, but in quiet understanding. They took their wounded, their records, and their lessons. Some Krell stayed behind, not as occupiers, but as students. They sat in human classrooms, asked questions about music and math, and sometimes, just sometimes, shared stories of their own childhoods. Weeks turned to months. The scars of war remained, but new things grew in their place. Human engineers helped rebuild Krell outposts damaged in the chaos. Krell medics sent healing nanites to villages still recovering. Trade ships marked with both human and Krell symbols began to cross the void, carrying not weapons but wheat, books, and seeds. One evening, Ethan stood on a hill outside what was once Chicago. The city was being rebuilt slowly, with hands instead of machines. He watched children play near a half-finished school. A young boy ran up to him holding a toy made of scrap metal. "What's Rule 1? The boy asked. Ethan knelt. "It means you never let anyone make you forget who you are." The boy thought about that. Then he smiled and ran back to his friends. Far away, on Vorthus Prime, Lord Vexar stood on his palace balcony. The twin suns set behind the spires, painting the sky in gold and violet. He held a small data chip. The one Tal had given to Ethan, now returned as a gesture of peace. On it was a recording of a human lullaby, sung by a woman on Mars to her newborn child. He listened to it every night. The galaxy had believed the Krell Dominion was eternal. It had believed humanity was weak. Both were wrong. Strength was not in size or fire. It was in patience, in silence, in the choice to walk away from revenge and build something better instead. And as the stars turned above a healing Earth, the lesson spread, not through conquest, but through memory. Rule 1 lived on. Not as a weapon, but as a promise.